Okay. Had they told me I was going to have to follow a fire demonstration, I might have thought twice about doing this talk. But it's a good thing that I have a ton of pictures of sea turtles, I'm sure everyone's favorite sea creature. So, by a show of hands, who envisions my research looks something like this? Okay, a few. Well, you are all wrong. It turns out, well, we're gonna go back actually, I already messed up. You're all wrong, and in reality, you would never find me scuba diving because I'm the rare marine ecologist that does not like the water. I, in fact, have a fear of drowning and both an irrational fear of sharks. So yeah. And so most marine scientists have truly inspirational stories about falling in love with the ocean or marine creatures as children. I got into marine science a little later in life. In fact, my earliest memory of the water involves a 7-year-old Matt storming out of swim lessons because he didn't want to go to the deep end of the pool. So, how does somebody who grew up hating the water turn into a marine scientist? Well, it turns out you can get around that problem by studying dead things. And so that's what I did. I study the bones of sea turtles that have died naturally and washed up on our beaches. More specifically, I study their humerus bone, which is the bone that connects your elbow to your shoulder. And it turns out that sea turtle bones are the key to unlocking mysteries that have perplexed the sea turtle world for decades. And that's because they contain these annual growth rings, similar to tree rings, that we can measure and sample to study how they grow, where they live, what they eat, and how they're impacted by human activities such as oil spills during the 99% of their life when they're not on the nesting beaches. But before we get into my research, let's talk about how a kid who grew up hating the water turns into a marine scientist. Like anybody who studies wildlife, I've always loved animals. But for a long time, I thought that meant I should become a veterinarian. I mean, I once tried to save a baby mouse that I found in my driveway, so if that's not a sign, I don't know what is. And so when I went to college at Auburn University in Alabama, that's what I first pursued, trying to become a vet. But it wasn't until between my sophomore and junior years of college, when I actually started working at a vet's office, that I realized just how much time you spend with both animals and people that more often than not want nothing to do with you. And so I quickly decided that that was not the career path for me. And so, needless to say, at this point I was a bit lost because I had just nixed the career path that I thought I was on since I was essentially born. But lucky for me, I had become involved with undergraduate research, specifically in biological sciences, as a freshman. And I had a pretty adamant research advisor that pushed me to carry out my own research project, to really test out if I could cut it as a researcher. And so the next summer, I followed one of her grad students to the Canadian Rocky Mountains to study ground squirrels. I'm sure everyone's favorite small mammal. Long story short, I spent that summer collecting their poop to study how they digest their food. Now, if you can imagine, it's difficult to study cats and dogs in a vet setting. Squirrels also do not want you to touch them. But despite touching lots of poop and working with these very uncooperative animals for the summer, by the end of that summer, I was hooked on biological research. And so about that time, I was about to graduate from college, and on a whim, I applied to work on a sea turtle nest on the beach because I decided I wanted to gain some experience that had more clear conservation outcomes. Little did I know that at that time, that summer would become my origin story as a marine scientist, because that's when I first became captivated by sea turtles. There's something truly majestic about watching these ancient creatures emerge from the ocean, lay a nest, and disappear back into the water. I mean, they're pretty cool. Is that not a dinosaur? And the more I learned about their life history, the more fascinated I became. I learned that there are only 7 species of sea turtle alive today, and that despite roaming our oceans for tens of millions of years, all are at risk of extinction due to human activities. I also learned that despite decades of intense conservation and management, understanding of their life history was actually pretty poor, other than when they're on the nesting beach. We study that a lot. And so by the end of that summer, I had decided I want to keep working with sea turtles. They're pretty cool. There's a lot of areas that we can do a lot more research. And so that's how I kind of started coming to OSU. Despite not having many sea turtles, you actually can find that turtle off of Oregon coast, very far away. OSU is actually home to one of the leading experts in sea turtle population ecology, Selena Havel. And I somehow convinced her to let me join her lab. And so I came to OSU and really got started working on sea turtle bones somewhat on a whim. We spent a long time talking about what I might be able to do, what I might do for my research, but some of her collaborators had these loggerhead turtle bones that they wanted to analyze and to use to study when these turtles are migrating from offshore to inshore habitats. So these are turtles that can be found in the Atlantic Ocean. And so this became my master's research. And so it turns out that the ratios of certain elements differ between offshore and nearshore habitats, and that these really unique signatures are deposited in their bones. And if we sample their growth rings individually, we can build a really unique timeline of their habitat use that perfectly aligns with the information we get, the timeline we can get of age and growth also from their bones. And so by combining these multiple data sets, we were basically able to determine what specific ages and sizes these turtles were migrating from offshore to nearshore habitats. And so understanding when and where endangered species occur is very important for their conservation and management. And so the research for my PhD has kind of gone along similar lines, but I switched my focus to working on the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle. This species has the dubious distinction of being the most critically endangered species of sea turtle in the world, having nearly gone extinct in the 1980s. More specifically, my research is focused on studying how diet, habitat use, and the Deepwater Horizon oil spill may have impacted their growth rates. So as a general rule in sea turtles, growth is highly variable. You could have one turtle growing 4 times faster than the other, and then both be the same exact age. We know the environment largely drives this, but what specifically is not clear. And so my research has helped trying to fill some of those knowledge gaps. And understanding what causes some turtles to grow slower than others is important because anything that interrupts their growth rates can impact how long it takes them to reach maturity and can reduce their survival. And in species that take decades to mature, that is a bad thing, necessarily. And so those two things combined can really impact the recovery of endangered species. But one does not just simply go out and find lots of dead turtle bones to work on one's dissertation. It truly takes a village. I have the privilege of working with a really unique data set that's comprised of over 1,000 Kemp's Ridley humerus bones that have been collected over the past 20 years. And they were collected by the hundreds of state, federal, and private partners that collectively make up the Sea Turtle Stranding and Salvage Network. Now, this network includes all beaches that run from Maine to Texas, and if you've ever seen a sea turtle in a rehab center or an aquarium, it's very likely it was first found by somebody in this network. And occasionally, when a turtle is dead, they will collect a humerus bone from them. And so, if you haven't really got this yet, what's really cool about the turtle bones is that they have a very long record of growth history. So from a single bone, I can get up to 12 growth rate estimates for a single individual. And this is very much in contrast to the regular way we study sea turtle growth, which requires you going out, finding a turtle, measuring and tagging it, releasing it, and then hoping to one day find it again just to get one growth rate estimate. So there's a lot of value in these bones. And so the story of how my project is even possible is very much similar to the story of sea turtle conservation in general. When working with such long-lived, highly migratory species, major advances in knowledge and conservation success only come from sustained collaborative efforts. And the story of the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle was once the poster child of what could be achieved when an international team of scientists and governments come together to try to save an endangered species. The species is unique because it only nests in a handful of beaches in Mexico and South Texas, so in the Gulf of Mexico. We also have a video of a nesting event in 1947 that we've been able to use to estimate that there were once 50,000 turtles nesting annually on these beaches. The problem is that these same life history features that make this species unique also make them easy to overexploit. In the 50s and 60s, almost every single egg and nest was being collected for consumption, and many, many turtles were dying as bycatch in fisheries. The problem was so bad that by the 80s, the number of turtles nesting annually on this beach dropped to 400, representing a 99% decline in the number of turtles nesting on this beach in only 4 decades. So clearly something needed to be done, otherwise this species was on track to be lost forever before the turn of the century. And so a binational recovery effort was initiated jointly between Mexico and the United States, beginning in the 60s and 70s, that implemented nest protection and protections for nesting females, increased in-water survival through changes in fishing practices, and led to the implementation of a reintroduction program that created a new nesting colony in South Texas that still exists today, by the way, which is pretty cool. And what's great is that these efforts really were working. By the 90s, the population began to grow exponentially, such that by 2009, there were 10,000 nesting females, a quarter the size of the historic population size. This population was growing so fast that it was on track to be removed completely from the Endangered Species Act by the mid-2020s. That is the crown jewel of any conservation effort. You want to be off that act. The problem is, in 2010, the number of nesting turtles began to fluctuate widely, bringing uncertainty to the long-term recovery of the species. And while there are multiple competing hypotheses as to what's going on, it's likely no coincidence that this is the same year as the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which we know is generally bad for sea turtles. And so the problem is it's been very difficult for us to specifically tie any of these nesting changes to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill specifically. And my research is not necessarily directly related to those changes in nesting numbers, but should shed light on how that oil spill may have impacted their growth rates. What's clear is that the chemistry story is still being written. And while new threats are emerging just as we're putting old threats to bed, I remain optimistic about the species' future. These species have been roaming our oceans for tens of billions of years, and so we know that sea turtles are nothing but resilient. But we know that conservation measures, when implemented properly, do work. And so if there's one thing I've learned from studying sea turtles and their bones, is that we can push the bounds of knowledge and achieve the previously unattainable if only we work together. Thank you.